When a billionaire humiliates the wrong man in a room full of people, he expects nothing to happen. He expects silence. He expects the room to laugh a little, or look away a little, and then move on. He expects the moment to dissolve the way all his moments dissolve. Quickly, cleanly, without consequence. Because consequence is something that has always happened to other people. And for most of his life, he was right. But on the morning of November 14, 2023, inside a conference room at a mid-sized Hollywood studio in Burbank, California, Harlan Voss made a mistake that would cost him everything he had spent his entire career building. The mistake was not complicated. He looked at a man who had just walked through the door. He looked him up and down, slowly, in front of 30 people. And then he said, loudly enough for every single person in that room to hear, "I thought agents were supposed to tell clients how to dress for meetings." The man he said it to was Keanu Reeves. And the room stopped breathing. Now here is the thing you need to understand before this story goes any further. Keanu Reeves did not yell. He did not threaten. He did not pull out his phone and post anything. He did not call a lawyer or a journalist or a powerful friend. He said 2 words, quietly, to the man who had just humiliated him in front of 30 people. 2 words that the room would not forget for a long time. Then he stood up, and he walked out. That was it. That was all he did. By the next evening, the studio was gone. Not struggling. Not under review. Not in a difficult meeting about its future. Gone. Locked. Dark. Finished. 31 people lost their jobs. Millions of dollars were frozen. Lawyers were called in cities on both coasts. Regulators opened formal investigations. A billion-dollar man who had never once been made to feel small sat in his car in a Burbank parking lot and tried to understand how a morning that had started with him feeling completely in control had ended with everything he owned dissolving around him before midnight. And the most extraordinary part of all of it, the part that will stay with you long after this video ends, is that Keanu Reeves did not do a single thing to make any of it happen. Not one thing. Because he didn't have to. Because something else was already in motion inside that room. Something that had been building for 14 months, held in place by fear and patience, and a woman sitting 3 chairs down from the head of the table, who had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for exactly the kind of moment she had just witnessed. She watched what happened to Keanu Reeves. She watched the room laugh a little and look away a little. She watched a good man absorb something he did not deserve, with a grace that made everything around him look shabby by comparison. And something in her went very quiet, and then very clear. What she did in the next hour would bring down everything. But here is the cliffhanger nobody saw coming. The detail that reporters missed, that trade publications never printed, that only came out months later, when someone finally asked the right question of the right person in the right way. The thing that started all of it, the real first domino. It wasn't the emails. It wasn't the documents. It wasn't the lawyers or the regulators or the financial gap or the guild inquiry. It was something that happened before Keanu Reeves even walked into the building. Something so small that the security guard it happened to didn't understand what it meant until a journalist explained it to him 3 weeks later. And when she explained it, he went quiet for a long time. And then he said, very softly, "So it started at my gate. Watch the whole video." Because what connects that gate, that room, that woman, and the last thing Keanu Reeves did before he walked out of the building, that connection is the whole story. And the whole story is unlike anything Hollywood has ever accidentally told about itself. It starts with a man who asked a security guard his name, and it ends with the lights going out on an empire. Stay with us. The first thing you need to know about Keanu Reeves is that he carries his own bags. Not because he can't afford someone to carry them, not because he is making a point. He carries them because it simply never occurred to him to make someone else do it. This sounds small. In Hollywood, it is enormous. Los Angeles in 2023 was a city still finding its feet. The writers had been on strike since May. The actors joined them in July. For 148 days, the streets outside studio gates were filled with people holding signs instead of scripts. People who had spent their whole lives dreaming of making movies were standing in the California sun, sunburned and exhausted, trying to protect the right to be paid fairly for their work. Keanu Reeves did not cross a single picket line during those 148 days. He also drove to 3 different picket locations and brought food. He didn't announce it. He didn't post about it. A crew member took a photo on a phone from 20 feet away and put it online, and that was the only reason anyone found out. This is who Keanu Charles Reeves is. Or more precisely, this is who he became. Because he was not always this settled, this quiet, this sure of himself. He was built by loss, shaped by grief, and what came out the other side was something the entertainment industry had never quite seen before, and never quite knew what to do with. He was born September 2, 1964, in Beirut, Lebanon. His father, Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., left when Keanu was 3 years old. His mother, Patricia, was a costume designer and showgirl who moved her children, Keanu, and his sisters Kim and Karina, across 4 countries before Keanu turned 10. New York, Australia, New York again, and finally Toronto, Canada, where Keanu grew up in a rented apartment, eating cheap food on the hard weeks, and learning ice hockey in a city that took the sport like a religion. He was not a great student. He was dyslexic. He struggled to sit still. He got into acting not because it was a plan, but because a drama teacher in Toronto saw something in him and pointed him toward it. And he followed because he didn't know what else to follow. He drove to Los Angeles in a beat-up car that broke down in the desert outside Barstow, California. This is not a metaphor made up for a story. It actually happened. He pushed the car to the shoulder of the road on a day when the temperature was 104 degrees, sat on the hood, and waited for a tow truck. He was 20 years old. He had $3,000 in a bank account and the name of one person in the entire city of Los Angeles. He got the car fixed. He drove the rest of the way. He slept on a friend's couch for 11 weeks. In 1986, he got a small role in a movie called Young Blood, then a bigger one. Then Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989, which made people laugh at him in a way that was affectionate but not entirely respectful. Hollywood decided he was likable but limited. A pretty face, good for comedies and action films, not someone to take seriously. They kept deciding that, and he kept proving them wrong, so quietly and so consistently that they almost didn't notice. Point Break, 1991. Much Ado About Nothing, 1993. Kenneth Branagh cast him in Shakespeare, and critics sharpened their knives, and yet somehow, in the middle of every review that questioned him, there were audiences who kept showing up. Speed, 1994. The Matrix, 1999. And here is the fact about The Matrix that matters for this story. When the Wachowski sisters offered Keanu a percentage of the profits on top of his salary, he said yes. When those profits came in, and they came in at a scale nobody predicted, he gathered a list of the people who had built the film from the inside out. The visual effects artists who had worked 18-hour days to create bullet time, the stunt coordinators, the costume department, the crew members who would never see a red carpet. He distributed tens of millions of dollars among them. He did not hold a press conference. He did not put out a statement. He told his publicist not to comment if anyone asked. A stunt coordinator named Chad Stahelski, who would later direct the John Wick films, talked about it years later. He said the amount Keanu gave his team was life-changing, that it paid off mortgages and funded college tuitions and gave people in a profession that eats bodies and pays badly a moment of genuine financial security. Keanu's response, when a journalist finally pushed him on it, was 4 words. They worked hard. Yeah. He blinked, like the question confused him, like the idea of not doing it would have been the strange choice. That is the man who walked into Stage 7 at Pinnacle Vanguard Studios on November 14, 2023. He wore jeans. He carried a coffee he had bought at a gas station on Alameda Avenue, not because he couldn't afford better, but because it was on the way, and the man behind the counter had smiled at him, and he'd wanted to give the place his business. He stopped at the security gate. "Morning," he said to the guard. "What's your name?" The guard, a man who had stood at that gate for 4 years without a single executive ever asking, looked up, surprised. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Delgado." "Nice to meet you, Marcus," Keanu said. He meant it. He walked inside. He had no idea what was waiting for him. "Nice to meet you, Marcus," Keanu said. He meant it. He walked inside. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The conference room on the second floor of Stage 7 smelled like fresh coffee and expensive cologne, and the particular kind of tension that fills a room when someone important is in a bad mood. Harlan Voss was already there. He was sitting at the head of a long mahogany table that had been brought in specifically for meetings like this one. The kind of table that said, "Power," before anyone in the room opened their mouth. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit. His watch was a Patek Philippe, the kind that costs more than most people's cars. His hair was silver at the temples in a way that his stylist had carefully, expensively cultivated to look natural. He was on his phone when Keanu walked in. He did not look up. Harlan Preston Voss was 58 years old. He had the jaw of a man who had been handsome in his 30s, and the posture of a man who had never once been made to feel small. He had grown up in Winnetka, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, where the houses have long driveways and the kids go to private schools, and nobody ever really explains to them that the world they're living in is not the world most people live in. His grandfather, Elton Voss, had built a small empire out of regional movie theaters across the Midwest in the 1950s. Elton was the real thing, a tough, self-educated man from rural Indiana who had scraped and borrowed and risked everything he had to put up his first theater in Terre Haute in 1951. By 1965, he owned 14 of them. Elton's son Douglas had taken that foundation and turned it into a film distribution company in the 1980s, catching the home video wave at exactly the right moment and riding it through the VHS era and into DVD, with the precision of a man who read markets the way other men read the weather. By the time Harlan inherited the money, and the connections, and the phone numbers, and the sense of absolute entitlement that comes from never having built anything yourself from nothing, his net worth sat somewhere between $1.4 and $1.9 billion, depending on which quarter's Forbes estimate you trusted. Harlan had not built theaters. He had not built a distribution company. He had attended Northwestern University, graduated with a degree in communications, and walked directly into a position at his father's firm because his father put him there. He was not stupid. That is important to say clearly. Harlan Voss was smart enough to hire talented people, smart enough to recognize a good script when someone put it in front of him, smart enough to navigate the financial machinery of the entertainment industry with real competence. He had made genuine business decisions that had paid off. But there is a particular kind of man, and Hollywood grows them like a greenhouse grows orchids, in artificial warmth and with enormous resources, who mistakes inherited advantage for personal genius, who looks at his position at the top of the room and concludes that he must be at the top of the room because he deserves to be, rather than because someone put him there before he was old enough to understand the difference. Harlan Voss was that kind of man. He had co-founded Pinnacle Vanguard Studios in 2018. His partners were Crestholm Capital, a private equity firm based in Greenwich, Connecticut, that treated film investment the way other firms treated commercial real estate, as a numbers problem with a glamour coating. And Sandra Osei Bonsu, a veteran film producer from London who had 22 years of actual production experience, and who did, by most honest assessments, the majority of the real work. Sandra had a gift for finding stories that mattered, and shepherding them from page to screen, without losing what made them matter. She had produced 2 films at Pinnacle Vanguard that had been genuinely respected. One had received an Independent Spirit Award nomination, and one had quietly earned back 4 times its budget on the streaming market. Harlan had taken significant credit for both. Sandra was in London on November 14, 2023. She had a distribution meeting. She would find out what happened in the conference room that morning, the same way most people found out. From someone who had been in the room and couldn't stop thinking about it. But right now, at 10:15 in the morning, the room was Harlan's. He had been trying to attach Keanu Reeves to a project called Meridian Fault for 14 months. It was a thriller about a geologist who uncovers a federal cover-up involving a series of engineered earthquakes along the California fault line. The script was competent. The director, Craig Ellsworth, was talented in a careful, controlled way. The project needed a name that could open it internationally, and after John Wick, Chapter 4, had earned $440.1 million at the global box office in the spring of 2023, Keanu's name was the name. Harlan's team had sent the script. Keanu's team had read it and asked for revisions. Revisions were made. More calls, more scheduling, and finally, a meeting had been arranged. Not a signing, not even close to a signing. A conversation. A first real in-person exchange between 2 men to see if the thing was possible. Keanu had agreed to come in. That alone was considered a win inside the building. So the room was full. Executives who didn't need to be there had found reasons to be there. Assistants who were technically scheduled elsewhere had materialized. There were 31 people in a room built comfortably for 20, and the air was tight with the specific anxiety of people who wanted something and were trying not to look like it. Harlan was on his phone. The door opened. Keanu Reeves walked in, carrying a gas station coffee, wearing jeans and a dark jacket, and boots that had actual scuff marks on them. And Harlan Voss looked up from his phone, looked Keanu up and down, slowly, deliberately, and said, in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the room, "I thought agents were supposed to tell clients how to dress for meetings." The room stopped breathing, and Harlan Voss looked up from his phone, looked Keanu up and down, slowly, deliberately, and said, in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the room, "I thought agents were supposed to tell clients how to dress for meetings." The room stopped breathing. There is a specific kind of cruelty that powerful people deploy in group settings. It is not the cruelty of anger. Angry cruelty is messy and emotional, and it makes the person doing it look out of control. This was something colder and more calculated. This was the cruelty of a man who wanted the room to watch. Who needed an audience the way a fire needs oxygen? Who had learned somewhere along the way that public humiliation was the most efficient tool for establishing who was in charge? The 31 people in that room processed what Harlan had said in different ways. 2 of the junior assistants, the ones whose job security depended entirely on Harlan's goodwill, produced small, uncomfortable smiles and then immediately looked at the table. Not because they thought it was funny, because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't react at all. Craig Ellsworth, the director attached to Meridian Fault, went completely still. He was a quiet, serious man from Portland, Oregon, who had spent 6 months developing a working relationship with Keanu's team, and who understood, in the precise instant Harlan spoke, that those 6 months had just been endangered by a joke about jeans. A lawyer named Theodore Wachira, who was present to take notes on any preliminary deal terms, clicked his pen closed and set it down on his legal pad and did not pick it up again. Petra Adeyemi, the VP of Talent Relations, was seated 3 chairs down from the head of the table. She was 41 years old. She had a face that was very good at being neutral when it needed to be. She made it neutral now. But her right hand, which was resting on the table, pressed flat against the wood. Hard. A catering staff member named Rosa Villanueva had come upstairs to refill the coffee service at 10:10 a.m. and had not left yet because something in the room had told her, in the wordless way that rooms sometimes communicate, that it was not the right moment to move. She was standing near the credenza against the far wall, a coffee carafe in her hand, watching. And Keanu Reeves stood in the center of all of it. He had stopped walking when Harlan spoke. He stood about 8 feet from the table, in the middle of the room, and he did not flinch. He did not look at the floor. He did not look around at the other people in the room to gauge the temperature or find an ally. He looked directly at Harlan Voss. His face did not change. This is the thing that people who were in that room would talk about later, in the careful, quiet way that people talk about things they witnessed but are not sure how to describe. Not his stillness, not his silence, the look on his face. It was not anger, it was not hurt. It was recognition. The expression of a man who has encountered this particular species of human before, and is simply, clearly, without drama or performance, identifying it for what it is. He let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. Then he said, in a voice that was completely even, "I'm dressed." 2 words. Harlan laughed. It was a loud, proprietary laugh. The laugh of a man who had confused the room's silence for agreement. He gestured expansively toward the presentation screen at the far end of the room, the way a man gestures when he is moving past something because he has decided it is beneath him to acknowledge that it landed wrong. "Come on, I'm just breaking the ice," Harlan said. "Sit down. Let's talk about what we're building here." He pointed toward a chair, not the chair at the opposite end of the table, not the chair to his immediate right, where an equal or a guest of honor might sit. He pointed to a chair along the side of the table, a chair where, in every meeting in that building, the assistants sat, the note-takers, the people who were present to serve the meeting rather than participate in it. It was the kind of gesture that required no explanation. Everyone in the room understood it. That was the point. The point was that everyone in the room understood it. Keanu looked at the chair. He sat down in it. Not because he accepted the implication. Anyone who watched him closely enough, and Rosa Villanueva, from her position by the credenza, was watching closely enough, could see that he sat down in it, the way a man sits down in a chair that has been offered, without ceremony, without either dignity lost or dignity performed. He was simply present. Harlan clicked his remote. A presentation filled the wall screen. Market projections, international distribution maps, a mood board for Meridian Fault that someone had clearly spent real hours assembling, concept art, comparable films with their box office numbers displayed in clean white font. Harlan talked for 19 minutes. He talked about vision, and talked about legacy, and talked about what this film could mean for both of them. He talked about international markets in Southeast Asia, and the streaming landscape, and award season positioning. He used the word franchise 4 times. He did not ask Keanu a single question. Keanu sat with his gas station coffee and listened. He did not check his phone. He did not shift in his chair. He listened the way someone listens when they are deciding something, not the way someone listens when they are waiting for their turn to speak. When Harlan finished, he spread his hands flat on the table and smiled the smile of a man presenting terms he considers generous. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I appreciate you walking me through this." He paused. "I don't think this is the right fit." The room went very still again. A different kind of still this time. The first stillness had been shock. This one was something closer to awe. Harlan's smile stayed on his face, but lost its connection to his eyes. "Let's not make any decisions today," Harlan said. "This is just a conversation." "I understand," Keanu said. "I've made my decision." He stood up. He turned to Craig Ellsworth, found the director's eyes across the table and said, "Craig, good luck with the project. I mean that." Craig Ellsworth nodded once. He looked like a man who had just watched something he would remember for a long time. Keanu moved toward the door. He paused near Petra Adeyemi's chair. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her role. He knew only that she was one of 3 people in the room who had not looked at the table when Harlan spoke, and that her face, when everything happened, had held something that looked like recognition. "Thank you for being here," he said to her quietly. Petra Adeyemi looked up at him. "Thank you for coming in," she said. Her voice was steady. Her right hand was still pressed flat on the table. Keanu walked out of the conference room, down the stairs, through the lobby, and out through the front doors of Pinnacle Vanguard Studios. He stopped at the security gate. "Have a good day, Marcus," he said. Marcus Delgado, who did not yet know that this would be one of the last ordinary days at his ordinary job, smiled back. "You too, sir," he said. The black SUV pulled away from the curb. The gate closed. The building went back to its normal sounds. Upstairs, Harlan Voss was already on his phone. "He's overrated anyway," Harlan said to whoever was on the other end. "Post-John Wick bump won't last. We'll find someone cheaper and hungrier." He said it loudly. He said it in a room that still had 29 people in it. Rosa Villanueva set the coffee carafe down quietly on the credenza and began gathering her things. Petra Adeyemi opened her laptop. She started typing. He said it in a room that still had 29 people in it. Rosa Villanueva set the coffee carafe down quietly on the credenza and began gathering her things. Petra Adeyemi opened her laptop. She started typing. The email she wrote first was not to the journalist. It was not to the guild. It was not to a lawyer or a regulator or anyone whose name would later appear in any official document connected to what happened next. The first email Petra Adeyemi wrote at 10:51 a.m. on November 14, 2023, was to her daughter. Her daughter's name was Adeyeze. She was 19 years old, and in her second year studying film production at the University of Southern California. She wanted to make documentaries. She was the kind of young woman who asked hard questions and expected honest answers, and who had inherited from her mother the particular quality of being unable to pretend that things were fine when they were not. The email was 4 sentences long. "I watched something happen today that I've been watching happen in smaller ways for 3 years. I've been waiting for the right time to do something about it. I've decided the right time is now. I love you, and I'll explain everything when I see you this weekend." She sent it. She read it back after it was gone. She did not regret it. Then she opened a different folder on her laptop. A folder she had created 14 months earlier and named, with the kind of careful plainness that lawyers are trained toward, Internal Compliance Review, Q3 2022. Inside that folder were 114 documents, contracts, payment records, accounting summaries, internal memos, emails between Harlan Voss and the studio's chief financial officer, a man named Brett Calloway, that discussed payment structures in language that was deliberately vague in ways that only became clear when you laid them against the guild agreements side by side. Petra had laid them side by side. She had done it carefully, over 3 weeks in September of 2022, working at her kitchen table after her daughter had gone to sleep, with a pot of tea and a yellow legal pad, and the particular focus of someone who knows what they are looking for, because they have spent enough years in entertainment law to recognize the shape of it. What she found was not complicated. That was the first thing that struck her. People imagine financial misconduct as something elaborate and hidden, buried under layers of complexity that require forensic accountants and years of investigation to untangle. Sometimes it is. This was not. This was simple, almost lazy. Pinnacle Vanguard had been systematically underpaying residuals to writers, directors, and below-the-line crew members across 3 separate productions. The underpayments were not enormous on any individual line. They ranged from a few $100s to a few $1,000s per person. But they were consistent. They appeared across every production, and they were structured. This was the part that made Petra's chest tighten when she first saw it. Structured to fall just below the threshold that triggered automatic guild audit flags. Someone had done the math. Someone had found the number below which the system would not automatically look, and had deliberately, carefully, repeatedly paid below it. The total across all three productions was just under $2.3 million. $2.3 million taken, in small, quiet pieces, from the people who could least afford to lose it. The writers who had spent years developing their craft and were surviving on residual checks between projects. The costume department coordinator, who was raising 2 children alone and whose residual payment for Hollow season was $340 less than it should have been, and who would never know. The assistant directors and the set decorators and the lighting technicians, whose combined underpayments added up, line by line, to a number that would have funded Harlan Voss's Patek Philippe watch and left change. Beyond the residuals, there was something else. Buried in the 2022 production accounting for Hollow season, a film that had cost $18 million to produce and had performed moderately on streaming, was a gap. A $4.2 million gap between the funds that had been allocated to production and the funds that could be accounted for in production expenditures. The money had moved through a subsidiary entity called Vanguard Meridian Holdings LLC, which had been incorporated in Delaware in January of 2022, and had no other documented business purpose. Petra had flagged both issues in a formal internal memo in October 2022. She had addressed it to Harlan Voss, to the studio's general counsel, and to the Crestholm Capital representative on the board. Harlan had called her into his office 12 days later. He had been pleasant. He had offered her coffee. He had explained, in the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone who has confused themselves unnecessarily, that the residual payment structure had been reviewed by outside counsel and was fully compliant, and that the Vanguard Meridian Holdings transactions were a routine production financing mechanism that she was misreading because she lacked the full context. He had then said, still pleasantly, that he appreciated her diligence and hoped she would continue to bring that same energy to the talent relations work that was, after all, her actual area of expertise. She had nodded. She had thanked him for his time. She had walked back to her office and sat at her desk, and stared at her computer screen for 11 minutes without moving. Then she had made a copy of every document in the folder and saved it to a personal encrypted drive that she took home that evening in her bag. She had waited for 14 months. She had waited because she was careful. Because she had a daughter at USC and a mortgage in Culver City and a professional reputation that she had built slowly and seriously over 15 years. And she understood that what she was holding could detonate in multiple directions, and she needed to be sure she was not standing in the wrong place when it did. She had waited through winter, and through spring, and through the long, hot summer of the strike, when the writers and the actors were outside in the sun, fighting for the right to be paid fairly. And she had sat inside the building that was underpaying people, and told herself she was being strategic. And then on the morning of November 14, 2023, she had sat in a conference room and watched a man in jeans be publicly mocked by someone who had never built a single thing with his own hands. She had watched Keanu Reeves stand in the middle of the room with his gas station coffee and absorb the humiliation of it without flinching. She had watched him choose the side chair without protest. She had watched him listen for 19 minutes to a man who did not deserve 19 minutes of his attention. And she had watched him stand up and leave with more dignity than anyone who remained in the room. Something in her had gone very quiet. And then very clear. She was not being strategic. She had been being afraid. And fear she had decided at her kitchen table the night before her daughter was born, when she was alone and terrified and more certain than she had ever been about anything, was a reason to move, not a reason to stay still. She pulled up the contact for Dominic Fawcett at the Writers Guild of America. She had met Dominic at an industry panel in 2019. He was a senior investigator, serious and thorough, the kind of man who read documents the way other people read novels, with complete attention, looking for the thing hiding underneath the thing. She had kept his contact in her phone for 14 months without using it. She opened a new email. She began to attach documents. Her hands were completely steady. Outside the window of her office, the parking lot of Pinnacle Vanguard Studios shimmered in the November heat. A catering van was pulling out. A grip truck was pulling in. So everything looked exactly like it always looked. She pressed send at 11:47 a.m. Then she sat back in her chair, took one slow breath, and opened a second new email to a journalist named Saoirse Nally, who had spent 11 years covering the parts of the entertainment industry that the entertainment industry preferred people not cover. The document folder was still open on her screen. She began to attach documents again. Then she sat back in her chair, took one slow breath, and opened a second new email to a journalist named Saoirse Nally, who had spent 11 years covering the parts of the entertainment industry that the entertainment industry preferred people not cover. The document folder was still open on her screen. She began to attach documents again. Dominic Fawcett was eating a turkey sandwich at his desk on the 4th floor of the Writers Guild of America building on 3rd Street in West Hollywood when the email arrived. He read the subject line twice. Formal compliance disclosure. Pinnacle Vanguard Studios. Residual payment violations across 3 productions. He put the sandwich down. He was 53 years old. He had worked Guild investigations for 19 years. He had the particular quality of a man who has seen enough that very little surprises him, but who has also cared enough for long enough that nothing has made him stop paying attention. He read slowly. He opened the first attachment, then the second, then the third. He called his colleague Angela Reyes at 12:02 p.m. "I need you to look at something," he said. Angela was at her desk in 90 seconds. They read together in silence for 14 minutes. Angela had a habit of pressing 2 fingers to her lips when she was thinking hard. She did that now, reading the payment records, cross-referencing them against the Guild rate cards that she knew from memory, the way a musician knows scales. "This is real," she said. It was not a question. "Yeah," Dominic said. He called the WGA's general counsel at 12:19 p.m. By 1:30 p.m., a preliminary compliance review had been formally opened. Under Guild protocol, the opening of such a review triggered an automated notification through the Inter-Guild Compliance Network, a quiet, bureaucratic process that sent a standardized digital flag to the relevant signatory studio's registered contacts and to any financial partners listed in the Guild's production agreements. Nobody at Pinnacle Vanguard noticed it arrive. It went into an inbox managed by an assistant who was in a lunch meeting. But 340 miles north, in a glass-walled office in San Francisco, an analyst at Crestholme Capital's West Coast monitoring desk named Jeremy Osei, no relation to Sandra, had a software system that flagged exactly these kinds of notifications automatically. The system had been built after a different investment had gone sideways in 2019 due to a Guild dispute that nobody had caught early enough. Jeremy's screen showed the flag at 1:34 p.m. He forwarded it to his supervisor without fully reading it, the way analysts forward things that are probably nothing but could be something, because that is what they are paid to do. His supervisor read it at 1:52 p.m. and called the firm's managing director. Saoirse Nally was in a coffee shop on Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood when Petra's email arrived on her phone. She was supposed to be writing a piece about streaming platform consolidation, which was important but not urgent, and she had been staring at her laptop for 40 minutes without producing a sentence she liked. She picked up her phone the way people pick up their phones when they are avoiding their laptops. She read the subject line, "Documents for your consideration. PVS Financials. I am a verified insider, and I have attached primary source material." She sat up straighter. She read the email body, which was 3 paragraphs long, precise, and written in the careful language of someone who understood exactly what they were providing, and exactly what they were risking by providing it. There was no drama in it. No score-settling language. No adjectives. Just facts, sourced, with the documents attached. Saoirse had been sent thousands of tips in 11 years. She had a sharp internal sense for the difference between someone with a grievance and someone with evidence. They felt different. They read different. A grievance had heat in it. Evidence was cold. This was very cold. She opened the first attachment at 12:09 p.m. and did not look up from her phone for 22 minutes. Then she paid for her coffee, left the shop, sat in her car in the parking structure on Cahuenga, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to a forensic accountant she had worked with before, a woman named Dr. Constance Ihejirika, who consulted for trade publications and could read production accounting the way other people read plain English. Constance called her back at 1:15 p.m. after reviewing the documents Saoirse forwarded her. "The residuals gap is real and documentable," Constance said. "The Delaware subsidiary is the more interesting problem. That $4.2 million has no clean paper trail on the expenditure side." "Meaning what?" Saoirse asked. "Meaning someone moved money and didn't adequately account for where it went. Whether that's negligence or something more intentional, I can't tell you from what I have here. But it's not clean." The second call was to a guild source who confirmed, off the record, that a preliminary review had been opened that afternoon. The third call was to Pinnacle Vanguard's communications office, asking for comment on the residual payment structures across their 3 most recent productions. The communications director, a man named Paul Sharon, who had held the job for 8 months and had never dealt with anything like this, said he would call her back. He did not call her back. Saoirse began writing at 2 p.m. Bridget Scholl had been managing director at Crestholm Capital's Media and Entertainment Division for 7 years. She was 55 years old. She had grown up in Galway, Ireland, studied economics at Trinity College Dublin, done her MBA at Wharton, and spent 3 decades in finance, developing a reputation for being the person in the room who asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. She was not sentimental about investments. She was not sentimental about much. When her analyst's supervisor called her at 2:45 p.m. and walked her through the guild notification and what it potentially connected to, she asked 2 questions. Is this a compliance flag or an active investigation? Preliminary review, so far. Pull the full production financials for all 3 Pinnacle Vanguard productions and get me the Vanguard Meridian Holdings Incorporation documents. I want them on my screen in 40 minutes. They were on her screen in 33 minutes. She found the $4.2 million gap herself, without being told where to look, at 3:47 p.m. She looked at it for a long time. Then she called Crestholm's outside counsel, a firm in Midtown Manhattan where a senior partner named Graham Adeleke picked up on the second ring. "Graham," she said, "I need you to pull the Pinnacle Vanguard partnership agreement and find the forced dissolution clause. Then I need to know how fast we can move on it." Graham was quiet for 3 seconds. "That fast?" he said. "Read the clause," Bridget said. "Then tell me." Harlan Voss had spent the afternoon in a different meeting on a different floor, discussing the development slate for 2024 with a group of people who had no idea what was unfolding beneath them. He had been in a good mood. The Keanu situation had annoyed him briefly and then stopped annoying him, the way things stopped annoying Harlan Voss once he decided they were beneath him. His phone rang at 4:30 p.m. He looked at the screen. Graham Adeleke's name, Crestholm's lawyer. He stepped into the hallway. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. When Harlan walked back into the meeting room, every person at the table noticed his face immediately and understood, without being told, that the meeting was over. Harlan picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He left the building without saying a word to anyone. Saoirse Nally's article went live on the publication's website at exactly 6 p.m., timed for the end of the business day on the East Coast, late enough that the people it was about would have limited time to respond before morning. early enough that it would move through industry inboxes and group chats through the entire evening. The headline was precise and careful, and said exactly enough. Guild inquiry opened into Pinnacle Vanguard Studios over residual payment practices. Financial records raise questions about $4.2 million production fund gap. Within 40 minutes, it had been shared 2,200 times. Within 90 minutes, Variety had a reporter making calls. Within 2 hours, The Hollywood Reporter had a piece up confirming the Guild review and adding 2 additional sources who said the studio's internal atmosphere had been deteriorating for months. Paul Sharon, the communications director, issued a statement at 7:15 p.m. that said the studio was reviewing the matters raised and was committed to full compliance with all Guild agreements. Nobody in the industry read that statement and believed it. Sandra Osei Bonsu was in her hotel room in London, still in the clothes she had worn to her distribution meeting, eating room service she hadn't tasted, when her phone filled up with messages faster than she could read them. She called Brigid Scholl first. Then she called her own lawyer. Then she sat on the edge of the hotel bed, in a room that looked out over the Thames, and she was quiet for a long time. She had given 6 years of her professional life to Pinnacle Vanguard. She had made things there that she was proud of. She had also watched things happen that she had told herself were not her responsibility to fix. And sitting on the edge of that hotel bed with the Thames going dark outside the window, she understood that this was the bill for that particular decision arriving all at once. She picked up her phone and called her assistant back in Los Angeles. "Get me on the first flight home," she said. Graham Adeleke emailed the executed forced dissolution notice to all relevant parties at 9:15 p.m. Pacific Time. The clause was clear, and had always been clear. In the event of active regulatory inquiry, documented financial misconduct, or material breach of signatory Guild agreements, Crestholme Capital retained the right to initiate immediate operational suspension and commence formal wind-down proceedings. They initiated it. In practical terms, this meant that as of 9:15 p.m. on November 14, 2023, Pinnacle Vanguard Studios had ceased to exist as a functioning entity. Its accounts were frozen pending legal review. Its operational authority was suspended. Its staff were, technically, no longer employed, though the formal notifications would not go out until morning, because that was how these things worked, and the people whose lives were about to change had no idea yet. The building management system at Pinnacle Vanguard Studios received an automated instruction at 10:47 p.m. to engage the facility's security lockdown protocol, which placed all non-essential electrical systems on restricted timer access as part of the standard procedure for suspended operations. Stage 7 went dark. The long mahogany conference table sat in the blackness. The presentation screen was off. The chairs were empty. The credenza, where Rosa Villanueva had set down the coffee carafe that morning, still held a half-empty coffee urn that nobody had thought to put away. The building was silent. Outside at the security gate, Marcus Delgado received a call from the overnight facilities manager, telling him he could go home early. The building was going into restricted access. No explanation given. Marcus clocked out. He got into his car. He sat for a moment in the parking lot, looking at the darkened building, feeling the specific unease of a man who has been told something without being told anything. He drove home. He would find out in the morning, 14 hours after Keanu Reeves had walked through that gate and asked his name. The lights at Pinnacle Vanguard Studios were off. The door was not just closing, it was already closed. 14 hours after Keanu Reeves had walked through that gate and asked his name, the lights at Pinnacle Vanguard Studios were off. The door was not just closing, it was already closed. By 7 a.m. on November 15, 2023, the story was everywhere. Not just in the trade publications, not just in the industry group chats and the agency morning briefings, and the studio executive emails that arrived before the coffee finished brewing. It was in the general news. It was on morning television. It was in the notifications on the phones of people who had never heard of Pinnacle Vanguard Studios and would never have had reason to. Variety ran a full piece at 6:45 a.m. under the headline, "Pinnacle Vanguard Studios shuts down amid Guild inquiry and financial irregularity claims." The Hollywood Reporter followed 12 minutes later with additional sourcing that named the Delaware subsidiary directly. Deadline ran a piece that included a quote from an anonymous Crestholm Capital insider describing the dissolution as a decision made with no ambiguity and no hesitation once the financial picture became clear. The WGA issued a formal statement at 8 a.m., confirming the active inquiry and stating that the Guild was committed to ensuring full recovery of any underpaid residuals for all affected members. The statement was 3 paragraphs long. The third paragraph quietly noted that the affected members spanned all 3 of Pinnacle Vanguard's major productions, and that the Guild's records suggested the underpayments had been ongoing for at least 2 years. The California Labor Commissioner's office opened a preliminary review of its own at 9:30 a.m. Paul Sharon, the communications director who had failed to call Saoirse Nally back the previous afternoon, resigned by email at 10:15 a.m. His email was 4 lines. The 4th line said he wished everyone well. Nobody who received it focused on that part. Harlan Voss did not issue a statement. His personal publicist issued one on his behalf at 11 a.m. that described the studio's closure as a business decision driven by evolving market conditions, and made no reference to the Guild inquiry, the financial gap, or the dissolved subsidiary. The statement was widely mocked in the comment sections of all 3 trade publications, which was unusual. Trade publication comment sections were not generally known for spontaneous consensus. By noon, the story had grown a second layer. The first layer was the studio, the Guild violations, the $4.2 million gap, the forced dissolution, the speed of it all. That story was serious and consequential, and was going to have legal proceedings attached to it for months. The second layer was Keanu Reeves. It began, as these things often begin, not with a journalist and not with an official source, but with someone who had simply been in the room and could not stop thinking about what they had seen. A post appeared on a private industry forum at approximately 11:30 a.m. on November 15th. The forum was members only, invitation-based, used primarily by mid-level entertainment professionals, coordinators, development executives, below-the-line department heads, the kind of people who see everything that happens in buildings like Pinnacle Vanguard and are almost never asked about it. The post did not name the author. It did not name Harlan Voss by name. It described, in plain and precise language, what had happened in the conference room on the morning of November 14. The comment about the jeans, the side chair, the 19-minute presentation, the 2 words, "I'm dressed." The post ended with a single sentence. The studio closed 14 hours later. Within 3 hours, the post had been screenshotted and shared outside the forum. Within 6 hours, it had traveled far enough that 2 separate journalists were independently working on confirming the details. Within 12 hours, it was on platforms that reached people who had never read a trade publication and never would. People who knew Keanu Reeves only as the man from the movies, and who received this story the way people receive something they didn't know they needed. Not as gossip, not quite as news. As a parable. The comments underneath every version of the story said variations of the same thing, in 100 different ways, across a dozen different platforms and languages. This is what happens. This is what it looks like. He didn't do anything. He just left. What the world saw was the surface of it. The headline version. The satisfying shape of it. Powerful man is rude to beloved man. Powerful man's empire collapses the next day. The world saw a story about karma, but karma was not the right word. The right word was Petra, and the world didn't know her name yet. The world saw a story about karma, But karma was not the right word. The right word was Petra, and the world didn't know her name yet. On the morning of November 15, 2023, while the internet was busy constructing a story about a movie star and a billionaire, 31 people woke up and found out they no longer had jobs. Not all at once, not cleanly, not with the dignity of a proper meeting or a direct phone call from someone who looked them in the eye. Most of them found out through an email that arrived between 7 o'clock and 7:30 a.m. The email was written in the language that lawyers write when they are trying to say something devastating while being sued for as little as possible afterward. It used words like operational suspension and wind-down proceedings and affected personnel, and never once used the word fired, because fired implied fault, and fault implied liability. And liability was the thing everyone's lawyers were now focused entirely on avoiding. 31 people read versions of that email and understood, in the specific sick way that adults understand financial bad news, that the ground had moved beneath them overnight while they were sleeping. Marcus Delgado read the email in his kitchen in Reseda while his 3 kids were eating breakfast. His youngest, a 7-year-old girl named Sophia, asked him why he looked like that. He told her everything was fine. He got up and went to the counter and stood with his back to the table for a moment, looking at the wall. He had worked that gate for 4 years. He had never once been late. He had perfect attendance for the last 2 years running. He had been planning to ask his supervisor about moving into facilities coordination, a step up that would have meant better hours and marginally better pay. And he had been waiting for the right moment to have that conversation. There was no right moment now. Rosa Villanueva, the catering staff member who had stood by the credenza with the coffee carafe the morning before, found out when she called the studio's catering coordinator to confirm her Thursday shift and got a disconnected line. She called the main number. An automated message told her the offices were temporarily closed. She sat in her car outside her apartment building in Van Nuys and looked at her phone for a long time. She had worked catering contracts across 11 different studios and production companies in 9 years. She knew how this worked. She knew that people like her were the first to go and the last to be remembered, and the least likely to appear in any of the articles that were already filling up the entertainment news sites. She was right about all of that. Of the 31 people who lost their jobs that morning, not a single one was named in any trade publication coverage of the Pinnacle Vanguard closure. The coverage focused on Harlan Voss, on Crestholm Capital, on the Guild inquiry, on the financial gap, on the legal proceedings that were beginning to take shape. These were the consequential things, the things with stakes, that the industry cared about tracking. The 31 people existed in the coverage as a number. The studio employed approximately 30 staff members at the time of dissolution. One sentence, passive voice. No names. Craig Ellsworth, the director who had watched everything from across the conference table, released a short statement through his publicist saying that he was saddened by the closure and remained committed to finding a new home for Meridian Fault. He was professional and measured and genuine in his disappointment, and he would spend the next 8 months doing exactly what he said, finding a new home for the project, which would eventually be set up at a different studio with a different lead actor and a modestly reduced budget. Sandra Osei Bonsu landed at LAX on the morning of November 15 at 6:20 a.m. after a 10-hour flight during which she had slept for approximately 40 minutes. She was met at the airport by her lawyer and her assistant. She went directly to a meeting with Crestholm's legal team. She spent the next 3 weeks in a process that was exhausting and painful and relentlessly administrative, overseeing the wind-down with the same professionalism and care she had brought to every production she had ever run. She made sure, personally and specifically, that every one of the 31 staff members received their full severance entitlement and a direct reference letter from her, written individually for each person, not from a template. She made sure that the Guild's recovery process for underpaid residuals was supported by full studio cooperation. She answered every question asked of her by every investigator and regulator who asked. She would later say, in an interview she gave 14 months after the closure, that the experience had clarified something she had been avoiding clarifying for years. "I knew things were wrong," she said. "I raised concerns through the channels that were available to me. When those channels were blocked, I told myself I was being realistic about the limits of my power. What I was actually being was careful about my own position." She paused. "Those aren't the same thing. I understand that now." Harlan Voss retained 4 lawyers and gave no interviews for 6 months. When he finally spoke, a single sit-down with a sympathetic journalist at a magazine that catered to the kind of audience that found billionaire victimhood relatable, he described what had happened as the result of a coordinated effort by disgruntled employees and opportunistic regulators. He did not mention the $4.2 million. He did not mention the residual underpayments. He described himself as a passionate champion of independent film who had been brought down by forces that misunderstood his vision. The article received 200 comments. Most of them were not sympathetic. Petra Adeyemi was placed on administrative leave the morning of November 15. She had expected this. She had spoken to her lawyer the previous evening, after pressing send on the second email, and had spent an hour going through the specifics of whistleblower protections under California law. She understood what was coming, and had prepared for it with the same methodical care she brought to everything. She was calm about it in the way that people are calm when they have already crossed the difficult part of the decision, and are now simply living with the consequences of it. Her daughter Adayeze called her that morning, after seeing the news. "Mom," she said, "was it you?" Petra was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. Adayeze was quiet too, for a beat. "Good," she said. Petra sat with that for a long time after the call ended. Just that one word from her daughter, delivered with the certainty of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of doing the right thing. Good. It was, Petra thought, exactly enough. Petra sat with that for a long time after the call ended. Just that one word from her daughter, delivered with the certainty of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of doing the right thing. Good. It was, Petra thought, exactly enough. Now it is time to tell you the thing this story has been holding back. The cliffhanger that has been sitting quietly at the edge of every chapter since the prologue. The thing that was promised at the very beginning, and has been waiting, patiently, like a held breath, for the right moment to be released. Keanu Reeves didn't do a single thing to destroy that studio. He didn't have to. You know now that this is true in the literal sense. He made no calls. He sent no emails. He spoke to no journalists and contacted no guild representatives, and made no threats and issued no statements. He walked out of a building and got into an SUV, and went about his life, and the building collapsed behind him without his participation. But here is the part that nobody reported. The part that only 2 people knew for months, and that one of them only found out by accident, and that the other one, Petra Adeyemi, had never told anyone until she told a writer working on a long-form account of the closure in early 2024. On the evening of November 14, 2023, after the emails had been sent, after the guild notification had been triggered, after Bridget Scholl had found the gap and called the lawyers, and the dissolution process had been set into motion, Petra Adeyemi left her office at Pinnacle Vanguard for the last time. She took her encrypted drive. She took a framed photo of a daisy from her desk. She took the small potted succulent she had kept on her windowsill for 2 years. She left everything else. She walked down the stairs and through the lobby, and out through the front doors. And on the way out, she stopped. She stopped at the security gate. Marcus Delgado was still on shift. It was early evening. The parking lot was mostly empty. The Burbank sky had gone the particular shade of pale orange it turns in November, just after the sun drops behind the hills. Marcus looked up. "Leaving early, Ms. Adeyemi?" he said. He knew her name because she had learned his. on her first week at the studio 3 years earlier, and had used it every day since. "I am Marcus," she said. She paused. "I want you to know, whatever you hear tomorrow morning about this place, whatever happens, it has nothing to do with how well you've done your job. You've done it better than most people in this building. I want you to know that someone noticed." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means something." She nodded. She walked to her car. She drove home to Culver City. She made dinner for herself and called her daughter and went to bed at 10:30 p.m. and slept, remarkably, without difficulty. This is the part that matters. This is the cliffhanger. Not the studio closing, not the financial misconduct, not the legal proceedings or the guild inquiry, or the Crestholm Capital dissolution clause. The cliffhanger is this. 3 weeks after the closure, Saoirse Nally was working on a follow-up piece about the aftermath of the Pinnacle Vanguard story. She was interviewing people who had worked at the studio, trying to build a fuller picture of what the culture inside the building had actually been like. She spoke to 11 people. She spoke to Rosa Villanueva. She spoke to Craig Ellsworth. She spoke, briefly and carefully, to Sandra Osei Bonsu. And she spoke to Marcus Delgado. Marcus told her about the morning of November 14th, about the man who had arrived at his gate with a coffee and asked his name, about how nobody in 4 years had asked his name. He described it the way people describe small moments that turn out to be larger than they appeared, with a kind of careful wonder, like he was still figuring out what it meant. Saoirse asked him if anything else unusual had happened that day. Marcus thought for a moment. He told her about Petra Adeyemi, about what she had said on her way out, about the orange sky and the empty parking lot, and the words that someone noticed. Saoirse put her pen down. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure," Marcus said. "Do you know why she said that? Specifically that evening?" Marcus shook his head. He hadn't known yet, at that point, what Petra had done. Saoirse told him. She watched his face as she explained it. The emails, the documents, the 14 months of waiting. The moment in the conference room that had finally moved something that had been still for too long. The cascade of events that had followed across 24 hours. Marcus was quiet for a long time after she finished. "So the guy who asked my name in the morning," he said slowly. "And the woman who said someone noticed on the way out at night." "Yes," Saoirse said. "They didn't know each other." "No," Saoirse said. "But one of them started the day, and the other one ended it." Saoirse looked at him. "That's the story," she said. "That's exactly the story." Marcus Delgado sat with that for a moment. "Huh," he said softly, not dismissively. The way a person says, "huh," when something has rearranged itself inside them, and they need a second to let it settle. Here is what had happened, assembled in full. A man walked into a building and treated a security guard like a person. Inside that building, he was publicly humiliated by someone who treated people like furniture. He absorbed it with grace and left with dignity. His grace reminded a woman in the room of her own. That woman had been sitting on the truth for 14 months. His dignity unlocked her courage. She sent 2 emails. Those emails triggered a chain of events, regulatory, financial, legal, that dismantled a corrupt institution in less than 24 hours. The man never knew any of it. He had simply been himself, completely and without performance, from the moment he arrived at the gate to the moment he walked out the door. And that, the simple, stubborn, unglamorous practice of treating every person in every room as if they mattered, had been, without anyone planning it, without anyone intending it, the single most consequential thing that happened at Pinnacle Vanguard Studios on November 14th, 2023. Not Harlan's cruelty, not Crestholm's lawyers, not the Guild's investigators or Saoirse's article or Brigid Scholl's forensic eye for a financial gap. All of those things mattered. All of those things were real and necessary. But the thing that moved first was not a document or a dollar amount or a legal clause. It was a man asking a security guard his name, and a woman, watching from across a room, deciding that she had been waiting long enough. But the thing that moved first was not a document, or a dollar amount, or a legal clause. It was a man asking a security guard his name, and a woman, watching from across a room, deciding that she had been waiting long enough. Keanu Reeves was spotted 2 days after the closure, at a small independent bookstore called Skylight Books on Vermont Avenue in Los Feliz. He was alone. He was browsing in the philosophy section, the way a person browses when they are not looking for anything specific and are happy about that. A young woman who worked at the store recognized him and later described the encounter on a personal blog that nobody read except her friends, and then suddenly everybody read because someone shared it, and it traveled the way true things sometimes travel. Quietly at first, and then all at once. She wrote that he spent 40 minutes in the store, that he asked her for a recommendation and actually listened to her answer, that he bought 3 books, one of which was a worn second-hand paperback of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations with someone else's underlining already inside it, which he seemed to find pleasing rather than off-putting. She wrote that someone in the store asked him, quietly, if he had heard about the studio that closed. He looked up from the book he was holding. "I heard," he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't smile in a knowing way, or shake his head, or perform any of the reactions that the moment seemed to be inviting. He just returned his attention to the book in his hands with the calm of a man who has learned, through the particular education that only real loss provides, that most things in life do not require a response. He paid for his books. He thanked the young woman by name, she had been wearing a name tag, and walked out into the pale November afternoon. This is why the story stays with you. Not because a bad man was punished. Bad men are punished sometimes, and not punished other times, and the distribution of those outcomes has never been reliable enough to build a worldview around. Not because a good man was vindicated. Keanu Reeves didn't need vindicating. He walked out of that building with exactly as much dignity as he walked in with, and Harlan Voss's opinion of his genes had not touched any part of what he actually was. The story stays with you because of what it shows you about the weight of ordinary moments. Harlan Voss had spent decades making small choices. Choices about how to enter a room and how to look at people, and whether to stand up when someone walked in, and where to point when offering a chair. None of those choices felt significant when he made them. They were just the natural expression of who he was, or more precisely, who he had allowed himself to become, in the absence of anyone telling him he needed to be different. Those small choices accumulated. They accumulated in the memories of every person who witnessed them. In the memory of Sandra Osei Bonsu, who had watched and stayed. In the memory of Craig Ellsworth, who had flinched and said nothing. In the memory of Petra Adeyemi, who had documented and waited. In the memory of Rosa Villanueva, who had set down a coffee carafe and quietly gathered her things. In the memory of 31 people who had worked in a building where they were furniture, not people, and who had absorbed that reality day after day until it became invisible. And then one morning, a man walked through the gate and asked Marcus Delgado his name, and the invisibility cracked just enough for someone to see through it. Keanu Reeves did not save anyone. He is not a savior, and this is not that kind of story. What he did was simpler, and in some ways more radical. He walked through the world as if every person in it was worth the basic dignity of being seen. Not because it was strategic, not because he was performing goodness for an audience, but because somewhere in the long, difficult, grief-shaped education of his actual life, the father who left, the daughter he lost, the girlfriend he buried, the decades of being underestimated and misread and flattened into a box office number, he had arrived at a way of being in the world that did not require other people's cruelty to define itself against. He was just decent, fully, consistently, without announcement. And decency, it turns out, is not a small thing. It moves through rooms. It lodges in people. It sits quietly inside them through 14 months of waiting. And one ordinary morning, it tips a decision that was already leaning toward courage, fully over the edge. Petra Adeyemi found a new role 14 months after the closure, at a smaller production company where she runs the development slate with the kind of authority and respect she had earned years before she was given it. She has a photo on her desk, not of Adeyemi, though Adeyemi is also there. A photo of the Pinnacle Vanguard parking lot, taken on her phone on the evening of November 14, as she walked to her car. Just the empty asphalt and the orange sky, and the darkening building behind her. She keeps it to remember what it felt like to finally move. Marcus Delgado found a new position 8 weeks after the closure, at a larger studio on the other side of Burbank. On his first day, a producer walked past the gate without looking up. On his second day, an executive asked him to move his car. On his third day, a woman arrived for a meeting, stopped at the gate, and asked his name. He smiled for the rest of that shift. He still thinks about the man with the gas station coffee. He thinks about him the way you think about something that was small when it happened, and keeps growing the longer you carry it. And Keanu Reeves, who does not know any of this, who does not know about Petra's emails, or Marcus's new job, or the orange sky over the parking lot, or the photo on the desk, or the young woman's blog about the bookstore, got on his motorcycle on the afternoon of November 16 and rode out through Malibu Canyon with the Pacific glittering far below him, neither knowing nor needing to know that something good had moved through the world wearing his name. He just rode. Because that is what he does. Because that is who he is. And because some people, without trying, without planning, without ever standing at a podium or issuing a statement or asking for credit, simply make the world behave a little better by being in it. And that is the story of what happens when decency walks into a room full of power and refuses to shrink. Keanu Reeves never knew he started anything. He just showed up as himself, completely and without apology, the same way he always does. And that was enough. That has always been enough. Because kindness is not weakness. Treating people like they matter is not small. Asking a security guard his name is not a footnote. Sometimes it is the whole story. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. We have people tuning in from all over the world, and every single comment reminds us why we do this. Whether you are watching from New York or Nairobi, London or Los Angeles, Mumbai or Manila, let us know. We read every single one. And if this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about the way you walk into rooms, the way you treat the people that the world tells you are invisible, the way one quiet act of decency can travel further than you will ever know, then do one thing before you leave this page. Hit the like button, not for us, for Marcus Delgado, for Petra Adeyemi, for every person who has ever stood at a gate or sat at a table and wondered if anyone in the room saw them. This video reaching more people means this story reaches more people. And this story reaching more people means that somewhere, in some ordinary moment, someone might remember it. Might pause, might ask a name they didn't think to ask before. That is how kindness spreads, not in grand gestures, in small ones, carried forward by people who heard about them and decided to try. So subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here. We find the stories that remind you what people are actually capable of. The quiet ones. The ones that don't make noise when they happen, but shake the ground afterward. We find those stories and we bring them to you. And right now, on your screen, there is another one waiting. Click the video appearing right now. We will see you there.